Okay. All right. So, I'm sorry. All right. So first of all, before we begin, this morning's learning and breakfast is being sponsored anonymously. Lili Nishmas David Yehuda ben Asher Lamos and Shosh and Aliyah, and only Shav Brach and Atzlacha should come to the whole Mishpacha, the whole Kilo of Klal Yisrael, and Shkoyach to anonymous. Okay, so it's just like this, man. I'm not sure if you guys are like into Shovavim or eirev. We'll have to see where this goes. So it's like this, I couldn't let Talmud Avshi Hashem, I couldn't let us go by without acknowledging Shovavim. But it's like this. To me personally, when people think of Shovavim, at least what I think people think about when they think of Shovavim is Shmir Sinayim, Shmir Sabris, and Yonah Kedusha. And there's no question that's a major part of it. But I find personally that those discussions that are they're purely one-sided. They're only one half of the conversation, which is about what not to do and holding yourself back, and which is all holy and pure. But it's exhausting. It's exhausting, and it's not the full picture of what the sugya is. The sugya of Shmir Sinayim and Shmir Sabris is much, much broader than just what not to do and what not to see. It's much broader than that. And I feel, in my experience, has shown to me that the more we can talk about not just the whole sugya, and really where it's coming from, and the much bigger, broader picture. So although initially it might seem that sort of you're avoiding the issue, but you're not avoiding the issue. You're getting a solid background and a real better perspective of what the avodah is. And then the practical inyanim in terms of the surmirah sides of things are put into a much broader perspective, and a person actually is not exhausted by it. It's part of a much more pnimistic avodah. So it's like this. Now just a couple of minutes of background why I'm talking about eirev. We're talking about Shovavim. So it's like this. The concept of these weeks, the weeks of Shovavim, from Shmais all the way to Mishpatim, where in Ibriyar it's Shovavim Tat, all the way to Tetzaveh. So the concept of these weeks being a time of tshuva, that goes way back. We don't know exactly, it's not clear exactly like where it came from, was the first place it's mentioned, but we have very, very early sources mentioning Shovavim as an old minhag. So it definitely goes back, although we don't know exactly when it started, of it being tshuva. Now, what the tshuva was about, what it's focused on, so that runs the gamut. It was not very clear in terms of like the original minhag what the focus was on. Thank you. You'll have some achronim. I made a bracha before, don't worry. So you have to know. So a number of achronim say that maybe the tshuva is related to like the post-Yontif season after Hanukkah. Maybe it's something like that. It's not very clear. The Arizal came and was Medala that the inning of Shovavim, this old minhag of Shovavim, is connected. But the question was like this: what exactly is the tshuva focused on during Shovavim, and why is it during these weeks? That was not clear in terms of the old sources. So the Rizal comes and explains everything. The Rizal says that the inyan of Shovavim is as follows. The inyan of Shovavim is specifically to do tshuva in inyanim of Kedusha, and the Rizal said the reason for that is because these parshas that we're learning about, which is connected to Galus Mitzrayim and Gulas Mitzrayim, the whole story of the Exodus, is somehow woven and connected to that inyan of Kedusha. Yosef Tzaddik, the first experience of Galus Mitzrayim, if you go back already, right? Sari Meinu was captured in Mitzrayim. It's in Yoni Kedusha, right? Yosef Tzaddik is in Mitzrayim. His Nisayin is Kedusha. So somehow Mitzrayim is connected to that inyan of Kedusha, of men and women, of Shmir Sinayim and Shmir Sabris. And so Galus Mitzrayim and Gulas Mitzrayim, these weeks that we're talking about that's the Zman to really focus in on that inyan of Kedusha. That's where Shovavim, that's the idea, that's where it comes from. But once we have that sort of Pesach, in order to really appreciate what the inyan of Kedusha is and what Shovavim is about, so Rizal gives us a pointer, right? He points us in the direction of Mitzrayim. Galus Mitzrayim, that's what it's about. So to really, really appreciate the sugya in depth, them as Baimek and Pnimius, and to put Kedusha in a larger perspective, in a much broader, where it fits in a much broader picture. We have to really get to the bottom of what Galus Mitzrayim was, what Galus Mitzrayim is, what's going on over there. And in order to figure that out, it's all revolving around one particular sugya, and it's one of those things that on the outside, it's a blip on the radar. Mamish is nothing. It's one pasuk, it's a Rashi, it's a Medrash, there's one piece of Gemara, that's about it. But in Pnimius HaTorah, it is the essence of what was going on in Mitzrayim. It's the essence of what we're remembering every day when we remember Yetzias Mitzrayim, and it's the essence of what the world is going through right now. And I'll explain what I mean, and that's the eirev. The eirev. Now, again, a moment of introduction before we actually begin to learn. First of all, Shuas night, I went through this, but it wasn't recorded Aleph. It was Shuas night, okay? And so those that were there and have a very good memory, so certainly in the beginning this will be Chazar. But again, because we're now Shovavim based, so it'll go in different ways, and my head is a little bit more clear now than it was Shuas night, so we'll see where it goes. This in of eirev Rav, we'll see, today we're going to learn just the details, who were they, and the history of it, a little bit. But we have to understand that the Mar Deshmaitza, the master of this sugya, the balabas of this inyan of eirev Rav, is without a question the Vilna Gaon. So without a question the Vilna Gaon, that's his inyan. Now, what's interesting is that according to traditions that we have from the Vilna Gaon, this concept of eirev Rav and the tumah, the klipa, the golus of eirev Rav is not just a historical phenomenon. It's not just something that somehow is connected to Galus Mitzrayim and Galus Mitzrayim, as we'll see. It's mamish, what we're going through and where we are. Let me explain. We have a tradition from the Vilna Gaon. We have this in a number of sources in the Gaon himself. The Vilna Gaon said that the last Galus that we're in, we know is the Galus of Esav, right? Edom, Malchus Arisha. But we know that already Kadmonim say this, that the tail end of Esav is going to be another Galus, which is sort of like mixed up within Esav, but has its own identity, which is the Galus of Yishmael. That we have from earlier sources. Rishonim already, Ramban. The Vilna Gaon came and said that you should know, even the tail end of Yishmael, the very, very last Galus is the Galus of the eirev Rav. It's the Galus of the eirev Rav. That's what the Vilna Gaon said. So eirev Rav is no longer this, pasuk and chumash and this interesting thing that Moshe Rabbeinu had with them or whatever it is and gave us problems during the desert. The eirev Rav is the last stage of Galus. More than that, we also have a tradition from the Vilna Gaon that in terms of place, the last stage, the last stop of Galus is America, that we know this. This is a famous mice that we have from Chaim Volozhiner, that they once found that he was crying and so on, and they asked him why, and he said because he saw, and he had a kabbalah from his Rebbe, that America is going through the last stage of Galus. So they said, Rebbe, what are you crying about? Why is that so bad? He said, to get from Europe to America is not going to be so posh. That's what he said. So America is the last stop. And therefore, when we're learning about this sugya, so let's put those two mamarim together. You have a maimer from the Vilna Gaon that the eirev Rav is the last stage of Galus. And you have a maimer from the Vilna Gaon that America is the last stage of Galus in place. Which means that if we can identify, and this is what the tzaddikim have said, if to identify what America is, what's the klipa, what's the Galus of America? The Galus of America is interesting because people we think it's Esav, right? We're in the middle of Esav. But it's really not. Because there are certain qualities that Esav has, and America doesn't necessarily fit that. So what is Esav? What is America? It's Yavan, it's Paras, Montai, like what is it? In a certain sense, it sort of checks all the, fills in all the checks, it checks in all the boxes. It's like you're a hypochondriac, it's like listen to a thing on the radio. Is this, do you have it? Yeah, I got that, it's like America sort of checks all this. So what is America? America's the eirev Rav. America's the eirev Rav. The klipa that we're dealing with in American society, and that's what's attacking Nishmas Yisrael at the end of time is the klipa of the eirev Rav. That's what America is. So in order to figure out this sugya, so again, we're talking about Shovavim, and somehow the Arizal said Kedushas HaYesod and Shmir Sinayim, that Inyan Kedusha is connected with Mitzrayim. But to get to the bottom of what Mitzrayim is, you have to get to the sugya of the eirev Rav, and that's Mamish Inyan Diyamet. Mamish Inyan Diyamet. So it might take a few weeks, to get there, to figure this out in practical terms, and to see, what is the Galus of America, how it's unique, and this is why it's difficult. That's why the Galus of America, it's difficult. It's not, you can't compare it to any other time that we had. It's not the same. It's its own it has its identity, and to figure out how to handle it and what the challenges are. We sort of know what the challenges are, but to think about them and really to categorize it and to make a sugya of it, which is important, because when you understand the issue, right, like it's well known, if you understanding the kasha is half the answer, right? So to really figure this out, I think, in my personal opinion, it's all about the sugya of the eirev. So let's begin. All right, it should be Shalom Params of saying, at the very least, let's learn this sugya. It should give us the strength to be able to be amid in the nisyonis that we have. And by the way, that's why I personally find chizik in this, because when you're learning about the certain qualities of the gulfs that you're in, then all of a sudden, like, it legitimizes the challenges that we have, right? Instead of thinking like the challenges that we have just because there's something wrong with us, like what's pshat that our grandparents didn't have these issues? Like, why wasn't we have these issues? Well, it's because there's something wrong with us. No, this is a unique gullus, right? With the Yidden in I don't know if they say Yidden that are under the gullus of Hama, by what you call by Paras and so on. So they should feel guilty over the fact that our grandparents were slaves, and now we're being threatened. It's a different gullus. That's the mitzias of gullus. So the more we can identify and realize that the inyanim that we're challenged by is not coming from a problem within ourselves. It's an inyan of gullus. And again, that gullus comes from the outside, and it makes its way on the inside, but it's a mitzias of gullus. So now our that we combat that, and we tackle it by finding gula. It's not a matter of like throwing your hands up, woes to us. There's something wrong with us psychologically. That's the mitzias of gullus. We're in the gullus of the eirev, so you have to figure that out. Okay. So we'll see. We'll see where it goes together. Okay, I only have today prepared, so we'll see. We'll see where it goes. Okay, so let's begin. Who were the eirev? Okay, we're going to start very pashut, mamish, foundational, because almost I remember even Shavuos night, and I was walking to Shavuos night, so I met someone from a different shul, and they said, we saw on the flyer, whatever it is, that you're talking about the eirev like all night. So they said, like, it's like one pasuk. What are you talking about? So I said, okay, and he went to a different, fine. That's okay. But now it's being recorded, so it's fine. Okay. Parshas Bay. So the pasuk that we have about the eirev is basically the only pasuk that we have in Rav, is from this past Parshas Bay. Klal Yisrael leave Mitzrayim. It's talking about where we got permission to go and so on. So the pasuk says like this: V'gam eirev Rav ali itam, tzaynu bakar mikne kaviv ma'ay. It says in pasuk, the Klal Yisrael left Mitzrayim with the eirev Rav, a great multitude, eirev Rav, a multitude, and cattle and so on a lot. But this multitude, what does that mean? This multitude. So Rashi says over there, and he's quoting from Chazal. Rashi says, eirev Rav. What is eirev Rav? Taruvais umais shel gerim. That along with Klal Yisrael left Mitzrayim was not just Yidden, but also a multitude. What does it mean an eirev Rav? A great multitude. It means a mixture of many Goyim from all different nations that converted to Yiddishkeit or connected themselves to Yiddishkeit. They saw them in the Makkos and so on, and they went along with us. That's what Rashi says. Now, in the interpretation of Rashi, so just to figure out again who they were, Rashi says again, eirev Rav means a great multitude. So Rashi is learning that the word eirev means a mixture. In other words, many nations, many Goyim that were mixed up, and a multitude, many of them. What does it mean many? What's being added by that word many? So just to get a little bit of a picture. So there's a Marmuk there too, the Mechilta, the Medrash, goes in Rashi's interpretation that these eirev Ravs were, again, a mixture of non-Jews that connected with Klal Yisrael. And the fact that it says an eirev Rav was many of them, what is being added by that word Rav? So the Medrash says, V'gam eirev Rav, the word eirev Rav, the many, this great multitude, means that they way outnumbered the Yidden. So we know that the Yidden numbered in Mitzrayim, the left Mitzrayim was 600,000 men, right? Between 20 and 60, that age group of 600,000 men. Eirev, there was a mixture of non-Jews that came along with us, eirev Rav, and there was many of them. What does it mean, many of them? So says the Medrash, May of the Esrim Riboy, Divi Rabbi Yishmael, twice the number of Klal Yisrael. There's 600,000 men of Klal Yisrael that left, 1.2 million eirev Rav. So it was double the size of Klal Yisrael. That's the meaning of the word eirev Rav. So again, the interpretation of Rashi based on this Mechalta is that the word eirev Rav means two things. Eirev means a mixture of nations, a mixture of different nationalities and so on that went along with Klal Yisrael. And how many of them? Rav. Many of them. What does it mean many? Many means that whatever number Klal Yisrael had, double that. And the Medrash actually goes on, I didn't record this, but the Medrash goes on to say that Rabbi Kiva said it was triple the amount of Klal Yisrael. Rabbi Nosson says it was quadruple the amount of Klal Yisrael. But a huge amount of people. Huge amount of people. By the way, based on this interpretation that the eirev we're talking about huge numbers of people. So the Arizal in fact writes this. You don't have this in front of you, but the Arizal says that if you look in the beginning of Parshas Shmos, when Pari is speaking to his inner circle about how to handle the Jewish problems, so it's a little bit of a strange thing of how to figure out like how he saw Klal Yisrael. On the one hand, he says to his people, "Hein am b'nei Yisrael rav atzmi men." This nation of the Jewish people is huge and they're more powerful than us. Havnis chak malai. Let's figure out how to handle this, because if they start aligning themselves with a foreign nation, then they could easily overwhelm us. So we have to figure out how to handle this. That conversation, that pasuk doesn't sound like Pare hated Yidden. It just sounds like he had a serious concern about the safety and the security of his own country. What are we going to do with them? So he comes with the plan of slavery and so on. But then the pasuk says a little bit later on, "Vayikutzu b'nei Yisrael," that the Mitzrayim were disgusted by the Jewish, but they mamish hated Yidden. So which one is it? Are they just afraid of the power that Am b'nei Yisrael has, or are they disgusted by Klal Yisrael? The Rizal said, here's the Nakuda. Whenever you see in Chumash and Tanakh the word b'nei Yisrael, that means Yidden. Whenever it says Am b'nei Yisrael, or the Am, that's always eirev. So it said the Rizal like this: Vayikutzu b'nei Yisrael. The Pari hated Yidden. He hated the 600,000 men, the Yidden. But when it comes to the eirev, which that's where he didn't hate them, there were a lot of Mitzrayim in that, So his issue was, Hine am b'nei Yisrael rav yotzim mimenu. That is a lot of them, and now we're afraid. What if they associate with a foreign entity because they don't feel connected to the Egyptian culture? They feel more associated to Klal Yisrael, and so they feel like sort of this is like huge empire developing within our own empire. So that's unhealthy to do.
During the others.
So yeah, we're going to see this. This goes way back. Even to Yosef Tzaddik. This inyan of there being people in Mitzrayim that associate themselves with Yidden and feel a hiskashrus with Yidden goes way back. It goes way back. We're going to see. That's part of the discussion we'll have. That's why when the Avdus comes in, the slavery is put on Klal Yisrael. But the reason why that helps is because now that you have the Klal Yisrael subjugated as slaves, so now the hope was that the eirev Rav, these millions and millions of people, are not going to want to associate themselves with such a low class of slaves. So that was the Eitzah. He wasn't enslaving the eirev Rav. He couldn't enslave millions and millions of people. He was afraid of them. What he did was, who they're looking up to, which is Yidden, enslave them. And Memela, they're not going to want to associate with Yidden anymore, and they'll be able to get mixed up in the melting pot of Mitzrayim. That was the hope. Okay, that's what happened. It didn't work, obviously, as we'll see. That's the pasuk says. The eirev went along with us. So even when we were redeemed, they came along. That's all the opinion of Rashi based on this Mechilta, that the eirev was a multitude of many converts, and the reason why it's called an eirev Rav is because just the numbers were overwhelming. This is not the opinion of the Zohar Kodesh. The Zohar Kodesh, or maybe they're both true. The Zohar Kodesh gives a different taich on what the eirev was, and this opens up a whole different perspective when you learn Chumash. It's an amazing thing. So the Zohar says like this. It's in Parshas Kisisa, Marmukah number 3. The Zohar says, "Man eirev Rav." Who were the eirev Rav? So and the Zohar is addressing the possibility of Rashi and the Mechilta, and the Zohar rejects it. The chiludim, the kushim, the kaftarim, the tagrumim havu. The Koran eirev. Maybe you'll tell me that the eirev means a multitude, like Rashi says, a multitude of many non-Jews mixed up. And so says the Zohar, but I don't understand. You're telling me that in Egypt there was Ludim and Kush, they're all different nationalities. All these different nationalities are there. This is Egypt. Why is there all of a sudden millions and millions of foreign citizens mixed up in Egypt? Doesn't make any sense. If you're dealing with Egypt, then you would assume that they're all Egyptians. Well, Mitzrayim not. So if the eirev is leaving Egypt, the assumption would be that they're all Egyptians. So the Zohar is making a point that the Pshat of Rashi and the Medrash Mechilta seems to be a little bit funny. That there's now, not only are there a few, you want to tell me that there's a few, foreigners in Egypt, that's one thing. Millions and millions of foreigners, it's not likely. Another point, said the Zohar, V'ilu hava abrovia da'amin sagin, and if Rashi's right, it means a multitude of many foreigners mixed up, then the language of the pasuk in the first Marmukah should have been eirev Rav alu itam. It should have been in the plural. eirev Rav, a multitude of many nations went up with the Jewish people. The word, in English, it's went up, but in Hebrew it should have been alu, lashon rabim. The fact that it says eirev Rav Allah itam, that the eirev Rav went with them in the singular, it sounds like this is one nationality. If it's a mixture of a conglomerate of many different nationalities, then when I talk about them, I should speak about them b'lashon rabim. That's the question that the Zohar says. Ella. So who are the eirev Rav? So it says the Zohar, eirev Rav aliitam amachadav. Therefore, it must be that the eirev Rav that went with Klal Yisrael was one nation, it was one people. They were Egyptians. V'lishan chad, one language, one entity, and that's why they're described as lashon yachid. So who were they? Avol kol charshe Mitzrayim v'chol chartumet Elohein havu. These were the magicians and sorcerers of Egypt. That was the eirev Rav. So when we talk about the beginning of the whole mice, when Parai, Moshe Rabbeinu goes to Parai, and then Parai has his sorcerers to back him up and to make the whole thing as a joke. The Makis, we could redo it. It's just kish, it's just witchcraft. Those were the eirev Rav. Those were the eirev Rav. These were the elite, Sheb elite, and the heads of Egyptian culture. Yeah.
1.2 million.
No. So this is a different shot. This is a different shot. It's not a multitude of people in terms of number. It's in terms. We'll see in a second. In terms of their significance in Egyptian culture, it could be that in terms of their influence, they could equal millions of people. But these were the top echelon of Mitzrayim. These were the Chartumim. It says in Pasuk, "V'yasu gamhem Chartumim Mitzrayim," that the sorcerers of Mitzrayim mimicked Moshe Rabbeinu. They tried, at least, right? They wanted to copy the pelas, the wonders of the Rabbanu Shlalem. That's who the eirev Rav were. Kiv and Dechamu Nisan Upli and David Moshe, the Mitzrayim. And these are they know the malacha. And once they saw the Nisan that was going on, and they realized the truth that this is not Kishiv, there's something much bigger at hand. They saw the pelas that Moshe Rabbeinu was doing. Ahaj l'gabi Moshe. They went to Moshe, these Chartumim, and Amar Lein, they said to him, and others, they wanted to join. Now this Nakuda we'll see soon. Amar Lein kucharich Moshe. The Rabbanu Shalom says to Moshe Rabbeinu, Lo yisakabelan. Don't take them. Leave them here. These Chartumim, it's bad news. Amar Moshe, but Moshe says back to Rabbanu Shalom, Mari de Alma, master of the world. Kivan dechama gvurta dilach. If they saw your strength, and these are the people that really appreciate it, right? Because they mamish no kishuf, and they know this is something more than that. So, boin lisgaria, and they want to be magayer. Yachman gevurte, but kol yoyma halavai. They should be able to. They'll appreciate your power and your strength every day. They'll see the nis and the midbar. These are if we could get these guys on our side, can you imagine the PR of that? Like this is the Chartum Mitzrayim. The Mitzrayim was known for their kishuf, and these are the kishuf. These are the sources, and they become gerim. The kiddush Hashem that could come from that. So v'yandan deles l'kol bar minach, and they'll know that there's no other God but you. V'kabeloi Moshe, and Moshe said, I'm taking them. We'll see in this conversation between Rabbanu Shalom and Moshe Rabbeinu, and this interesting thing where the Rabbanu Shalom says no, and Moshe says please, and Hashem says no, and he says pretty please, and Hashem says fine, do what you want, and he takes them. We'll see. It's reminiscent of another person in Tanakh that was the great arch enemy with Moshe Rabbeinu. That also had a similar type of thing. I'm thinking of it's Bilam, right? Rabbanu Shalom says to Bilam, don't go curse Klal Yisrael. And Bilam says, please. And Hashem says, no. And Bilam says, pretty please. And then Hashem says, fine, do what you want. But it's going to be on my terms. Not Chas v'Shalom, Moshe Rabbeinu. They're enemies. But we'll see that when there's dealing with the eirev Rav, there's an awakening of that inyan of making your own decisions on some level. We'll see. Democracy, it comes up. So the Zohar continues. So why are they called the eirev Rav? Again, that's who they are, the Chatumim. Why are they called the eirev Rav? Amai Karalain eirev Rav. So why are they called the eirev Rav? So this is an interesting thing. I can't explain this, but it's good to see what the Zohar says. Elokol Charshin the Mitzrayim. Again, these are the sorcerers of Mitzrayim. Uber Hashayan, and by the way, says the Zohar, who are the leaders of this group of the eirev Rav? Yoinus the Yoimberis. These are two people. The Zohar elsewhere identifies them as the sons of Bilam. So going back to the connection with Bilam, the two heads of the eirev Rav were in fact the children of Bilam himself. Now, by the way, Bilam is a major player when it comes to Galus Mitzrayim, because we know Chazal tell us that when Parai was figuring out Havan Ischakma, like what do I do with Klal Yisrael? So he had a whole group of people, right? And the Eitzah of Galus Mitzrayim was Bilam. Bilam was the one that gave the advice of Avdas and Galus and to kill Yid, and that was Bilam. So behind the scenes, Bilam is the opposite of Moshe Rabbeinu in Parshas Balak, but it goes back to Golus Mitzrayim too. Moshe Rabbeinu is the Redeemer, taking us out of the Golus that was initiated and started with the advice of Bilam. So Bilam is it's all that same, it's that klipa. And so now the eirev Rav, the Chartumim Mitzrayim, who initially also are the ones fighting against Moshe Rabbeinu, trying to disprove everything he's doing, they're the two sons of Bilam. And now Moshe Rabbeinu is an unbelievable catch that they want to become a guy. It's unbelievable. It's like light coming out of the darkness itself. You're talking about trying to unend the Golus, trying to upend the Golus and to convert it into light, that the children and the child is always the revelation of the pnimis of the father, right? Whatever person has, you know more who you are from your children, right? So you're talking about the children of Bilam now want to be Megayer, and Moshe says that's like there's no greater tikkun than that. That's what the eirev Rav were. So why are they called eirev Rav? Go back, first line, second paragraph. So Zohar says like this, that there are certain times in the day where there's more of a koyach to do kishuf and to do witchcraft, which is coming from the Sitra Achra. So there's certain times that are more connected to evil than others. And that's B'derech Klal, the night, for sure, but even midday and on. From Chatzos Hayom and on, as the sun begins to go down and darkness begins to descend into the world, that's the Zman of where it's authentic, auspicious time to be involved with the Sitra Achra. But the Zohar explains that as follows. V'kol ilin charshin iloyin. The very, very best sorcerers, that they have real koiches, the top echelon of the eirev Rav, have mistakle michinoti shimsha. They were able to connect themselves to the Sitra Achra already from midday on, where even though the sun is out, but they're so sensitive to choshech, right? They could pick up on choshech that even midday, where it's beginning, where the sun is at least dripping down, and it's not dark yet, but it's on its way to nighttime. So the real big chartumim, they could pick up on the koiches of the Sitra Achra already from Mincha Gedolah, right? From 6.5 hours into the day after Chatzos, all the way out. Mishirusa the Shis Shoyis Umechza from 6.5 hours in, Ad Shirusa the Tesha Shoyis Umechza until 9.5 hours. We know in Halach and Seches Brachos, we know this in Zmanim, that Mincha, there's what's called in Chazal Mincha Gedolah, and there's Mincha Ketana. Mincha Gedolah means, let's say Chatzos is 6 hours into the day, right? Let's say the sun rises at 6 in the morning, whatever. So 12 in the afternoon, sun is in the midpoint in the sky. 12:30, that's 6.5 hours into the day, already the sun is beginning to go down, right? That's called mincha. That's called mincha gedolah. You could fish a dav mincha at that point. But then there's something that's called mincha ketana. Mincha ketana is what? Is 9.5 hours into the day. That's already much closer to shki. It's much closer to nighttime, and it's legitimately getting darker at that point. That's when you can still dav mincha, but that's when, preparing for Shabbos, certain halachas kick in, and other things like that. So there's a demarcation point in Chazal of Mincha Gedolah and Mincha Ketana. That's not just a random, what's the pshat with that number? 6.5 versus 9.5. Just random? Why not 8.5? Why not 10? The pshat is, the Zohar is revealing to us this idea, is that there are certain koiches of Tumah that are accessible, very more sensitive koiches of Tumah, more subtle Tumah that's accessible from 6.5 hours to 9.5. And from 9.5 till midnight, that's when even a non-expert can connect themselves to Koiches HaTumah from 9.5 hours into the night. So this is the idea. The idea is as follows. There's the eirev Rav. The word eirev doesn't mean mixture, right? According to the Zohar Kadosh, it's not a mixture of any nations. These are Egyptians. They're Chatumim. So what does the word eirev Rav mean? The word eirev doesn't mean mixture, according to the Zohar. Eirev means erev. It means evening. There's an eirev Rav. There's the evening when you count it from 6.5 hours. That's a large span of time. And then there's eirev Ze'ira. Then there's a shorter afternoon when you're counting from 9.5 hours. And this was the different divisions in the Chartumim. Are you like black belt, or not black belt, whatever. So if you're a black belt Chartumim, then you could pick up on Koiches HaTumah, eirev Rav. Right, even from 6.5 hours into the day, you can already feel the chayshach coming. But if you're eirev Ze'ira, if you're not a black belt kishuv macher, you're just a lower echelon, then you're not eirev Rav, you're eirev Ze'ira. Then you could connect the kishuv from 9.5 hours into the day. So this is the chiddush, that the people that were makash themselves to Moshe Rabbeinu were eirev Rav. These were mamish the most chashav b'chartumim. That's what's going on over here. So the Zohar explains. 3 lines in. Dahainu eirev rav rava. So if you could perform kisha from 6.5 hours and on, that's called the large afternoon. That's a large eirev. That's a large evening. That's a large time part of the clock. That's called eirev rav. Kol inan charshin zi'irin. But if you're a less level sorcerer, then you could only perform your kishuf from 9.5 hours of the day to midnight. That's it. And by the way, this is why that's why Tikkun Chatzos is the beginning of being awake at midnight. According to this week is the Yartz of the Rashash. The Rashash was extremely makpid. He in the Zar Kaddish and the Kisvei Ari, we find this big inyan of waking up at midnight, being up by Tikkun Chatzos, and you go and the reason the way the day should be is that the sun goes down, you go to sleep. By midnight, you get up, and that's when your day starts. In the Shar Kavanas from the Rizal, what's the beginning of the morning? The beginning of the day starts with Tikkun Chatzos. The Rashash explained that really the Nakuda is not so much to be up from midnight on, because I'm sure there's people like that's very hard. The Rashash said the main inyan is not to be awake at the moment of midnight, not to be asleep at the moment of midnight, to be awake at that particular moment. The inyan of being awake at that moment is because that's the transitional point between eirev, between a tekufa that's predominantly being influenced by the Sitra Achra, whether it be eirev rav or eirev zira, but it's definitely a time of darkness. And midnight is the transition to now the beginning of light. It doesn't seem like it's light yet, but that's when the koiches of toiv are more predominant in the world. So you want to be awake at that moment. Then you go back to bed, or maybe you didn't go to sleep yet, whatever. But to be awake at midnight, that's from the Rashash. Anyway, so he says like this: Inon Eloyin Devuhu, the great sorcerers, the eirev Rav of Mitzrayim, Hamistakl Mechinati Shimsha, they would be able to do their kishuf and to connect already when the sun begins to go down at 6.5 hours. Gedein Sharon Tesha Meya V'Tishin V'Chamesh Dargin. Again, I don't know what this means, but I'll just share with you words that the eirev Rav, they were able to pick up from 6.5 hours in 995 madregas of darkness that would descend onto the mountains of this world. As the Zohar says again, these are the words. Kedein Sharon, at that moment of 6.5 hours in, they would be able to pick up and to connect to Teisha Mei and V'Tishin V'Chamesh 995 dargin, L'Meshadata Al Torei Chashach, and they would be able to use those madregas of Tumah to spatzir, to take walks in the mountains of darkness. That's what it says. Now, by the way, this inyan of 995, okay, I'm not going to be able to, I can't explain it, but, a little bit of a Pesach. The name Elokim, if you spell Elokim, the Miloi Heyin, right? You take each letter and you spell it out in full, right? So Aleph is Aleph Lamed Pei, and you do that in what's called in a way of acharayim. Acharayim means that before, like nachma, Aleph Lamed Hey, Aleph Lamed Yud, Aleph Lamed Yud Hey. You do that to the name Elokim, it equals 1,000. If you do that, now if you subtract from that the 5 main essential letters of the name Elokim, then you have 1,000 minus 5 is 995. In Tanakh, Avodah Zarah and the Sitra Achra is always described as Elohim Acherim. Elohim Acherim. Acherim means others. Acherim also comes from the word Acharayim. Elohim Acherim means that the Iker Koiches of the Sitra Achra, everything comes from Elokos. Everything comes from a spark of divinity. But the Iker Koiches of the Sitra Achra doesn't come from Chas v'Shalom Yud Kei Vav Kei. It doesn't even come from Elokim in its purest form. It comes from Elohim Acherim. All these derivatives of the name Elokim, the Miloi and Acharayim, 995, that's from the Koiches of Sitra Achra come from. And the eirev Rav were so good at this, they were able to connect to as close to the shirish of Kedusha as possible without actually coming to Kedusha. They could pick up on the 995 madregas of where the koiches of the Sitra Achra are coming from. This is why throughout Mitzvah Yisrael we find this, that the name Elokim, Pari was familiar with. Whenever Yisrael Tzaddik talks to Pari and he says, You're Elokim, 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 Pari never questions that. All of a sudden Moshe Rabbeinu says, Yud Kei Vav Kei revealed himself to me and told me to take Jewish people out. He says, Mi Havai, I never heard of such a name. Elokim he was familiar with, because Elokim is the name from which Elohim Acherim descend from, where the Koiches of Tumah descend from. And from Paro was familiar with that. So the eirev Rav were able to pick up a 995 madregas of Tumah that descend into the world already from 6.5 hours into the day. And the koiches Tumah that come from these 995 madregas, derivatives of the name Elokim, would be able to be picked up upon by these eirev Rav in their chatumim. Now he says an amazing thing. The Zohar says, "V'inan havi avdi kol man di'inan boyin." Mitzrayim was a dictatorship. We're talking about the old-fashioned kings, right? But the Zohar says that these chevra, the eirev Rav, they had free will. They were free. They could do whatever they want. They were not subjected to the wills of the king. They had their own free range. To such a degree that all the Egyptian culture, they had their bitachon was in these eirev Rav. That's they had their many gods, but really who they put their trust into, who's going to protect us in a bad day, who's going to be able to help us out, it was the eirev Rav. That's what the eirev Rav were. They were the bitachon, and everyone, every person in Mitzrayim, at the end of the day, when push comes to shove, the eirev Rav will protect us, they'll take care of us. Right? Okay. Might remind us of a certain country. No, it's true. The Karlain eirev Rav, and they were called the eirev Rav. Begin the is eirev zeira. They're called eirev Rav because there's eirev zeira. There's a smaller evening versus larger evening. Utrei arvi inon. These are the 2 evenings. Valda, and that's the meaning of the pasuk. V'gam eirev Rav aliyita. That's what the Zohar says. Now, it's an amazing thing. Now, by the way, this idea of the eirev Rav being a huge catch in Moshe Rabbeinu's mind, a huge catch. And having this conversation with Rabban Shalom and the eirev Rav being connected to the name Elokim, as I just mentioned before, this is all hinted to in a Medrash Rabbah. Again, just when you learn the Medrash without the background of Pnimus HaTorah, it sort of goes beneath the radar. But now that we have a little background, we'll appreciate a little bit more what's being hinted to over here. In Marmukah number 4, the Medrash in Parshas Kisisa, this is talking about in the aftermath of the Egel. Remember, what was the language of the Egel? What happened over there? Again, Moshe Rabbeinu was gone, so all of a sudden the Klal Yisrael get nervous, whatever it is, and they decide to make an egel. And we're going to see that the ones that were initiated that process, that were the leaders of that program, were the eirev Rav. And what was the language that they said to Klal Yisrael? Eila Elohecha Yisrael. This is your God. Eila Elohecha Yisrael. Why not Yukiv Vavke? Why not Yukiv Vav? That's the main name of Hashem. If you want to really get Klal Yisrael on board, Eila Havaya the Yisrael. No, Eila Elohecha Yisrael. It's the eirev Rav. So he says that the Medrash says like this: Leich rei kishichis amcha. Hashem says to Moshe Rabbeinu, descend the mountain because your nation has messed up. Ha'am iksiv kan doesn't say the nation has messed up, but la'amcha, your nation. Does it mean? So Amar Moshe. So Moshe says, "V'bayin ha'olam, master of the universe. Minayin hinami. Why are they my nation all of a sudden?" So Amar le'Hakadosh Baruch Hu, because Hashem responded to him, Amchehem. They're your nation. They're your responsibility. Sha'ad sho'ib Mitzrayim. Because when we were in Egypt, remember, Amarti lach, I told you, v'itzeis et tzivai seyes ami. I told you, take out my army, my nation. What does it mean? It's an amazing thing, right? What does the pasuk mean? It's a double lashon. Take out tzivai say, the army of the Jewish people, my nation. What's that saying? Amarti lach, and Hashem says, what I was hinting to is, shaloi la'arvim eirev Rav. Don't let the eirev Rav get mixed in. Leave them behind. But now the Rebbe says to Moshe, Sheyisa Anav, you're a humble person, the kosher and a good guy. So Amartali, so you told me, how can you, they want to do tshuva, they want to come back, how can you say no? And the Rebbe says, you're too nice, you're an Anav, you're kosher. And so what happened? I knew what's going to come with this eirev Rav. I knew what's going to come with them. Amarti lach, but because you pushed me and you asked, so I said, Leich v'aseker tzaynecha. Fine, go, do what you want. Do what you want. And that's what happened. And they're the ones that made the egel. They continue connecting to Avodah Zarah the whole time. They must, I say, they made the egel. And they're causing my people, Klal Yisrael, to do Averis like this. Re'ei maksiv. And this is all hinted to, it says in the Medrash, what the pasuk says, Eila Elohecha Yisrael. Eila Elohecha Yisrael. L'kach Amar Kadosh Baruch Hu, Leich rei kishichas amcha. It means Eila Elohecha Yisrael. Eila Elohecha Yisrael means that there's an outside entity telling Klal Yisrael, Eila Elohecha, and they use that term, Eila Elohecha. Now, we're gonna end with this now, as Hashem, and next week. So today, the point of today is to get a little bit of historical background of who these eirev were, and to open up a few questions. Okay. The first question we have to deal with is what is this inyan that Moshe Rabbeinu? I mean, the Rebbe Shalom says it's a bad idea. Moshe Rabbeinu, b'chol beis yinemenu, this Indian that Moshe Rabbeinu is pushing, no, it's we should accept them. It's a very difficult Indian to appreciate this, and to go even more. Moshe Rabbeinu's affinity and his deep desire to be makar of the eirev, not only was he willing to actually, push back on the Rabban Shalom that we should take the eirev. In Marmukah number 5, we have a piece from the Arizal where Moshe Rabbeinu was actually willing to manipulate a little bit Torah itself in order just to be makar of the eirev. See how much Mesiras Nefesh he had for this. Moshe took Torah very seriously. Listen to what it says in Marmukah number 5. This is from Shar Psukim, also in Parshas Bai. So in Parshas Bai, there's a very big difference between after Makas B'charis, the Rabban Shalom warns, Makas B'charis is coming, fine. And then the Rabban Shalom moves in to talk about some halachas of Pesach, Matzah, and Mar, and so on. And then the Rabban Shalom tells us about other mitzvahs. The order of how the Rabban Shalom tells Moshe these other mitzvahs and how Moshe Rabbeinu then tells Klal Yisrael about the mitzvahs are switched. When the Rabban Shalom tells Moshe, he tells Moshe about two mitzvahs. He tells Moshe about Pidin Ben, and he tells Moshe about the mitzvah of remembering Yetzias Mitzrayim. Those are the two mitzvahs in that order. Pidin Ben, number 1, and remembering Yetzias Mitzrayim. When Moshe Rabbeinu then tells Klal Yisrael, he reverses it. First, he mentions the mitzvah of Yetzias Mitzrayim, of remembering Yetzias Mitzrayim always, and then he mentions Pidin Ben. So first you missed this. Why the switch? Listen to what Rizal says. Moshe Rabbeinu saw, Vine, and he had the following concern. If now this is really the beginning of Klal Yisrael being given mitzvahs, because until now, even though we had mitzvahs given to us, but they were more about Pesach. Now this is just really the beginning of Torah. Moshe Rabbeinu was concerned. If the first mitzvah I say to them is Pidin Ben, after talking about matzahs and Pesach, the first thing I talk about is if I first tell them, the first thing I tell them is Pidin Ben, and the eirev are going to hear in Pidin Ben, Kadesh li kol b'char b'vnei Yisrael, v'loi be'eirev rav. Right? Pidin Ben is a mitzvah only to Klal Yisrael who were threatened by Makas B'chairis and survived. As we'll see in a second, the Avdus, as I said, the slavery was only for Klal Yisrael, not the eirev rav. So they were not part of this whole sugya of they need the Makas. It was not negated to them. So the Inut Pidin Ben, redeem the firstborn, which is as a result of Klal Yisrael being protected from Makas B'chairis, right, which was a plague on the Egyptians that were enslaving them, not the eirev rav, right? The eirev rav, they were passive about the whole thing. So the mitzvah Pidin Ben is only on Yidden. So says Moshe Rabbeinu, if the first mitzvah I say is something that's only to Yidden, not to eirev rav, then what? Then they're going to have a chalishas adas. They're going to feel rejected and dejected, and they're gonna go back to their ways of Mitzrayim. And they'll return to their mistaken ways. Ubefrat. And now it's very easy for them to turn around because we didn't leave yet, right? All they have to do is just stay, right? So Moshe Rabbeinu is very concerned about this. But because Moshe Rabbeinu wants to bring them under the Shechina and he wants to be makar of them, and they shouldn't reject the Rabban Shalom. Therefore, Moshe switches the order, and the first thing he says is, "Remember Yetzias Mitzrayim." The mitzvah kalalis, and that's a mitzvah that could be shaykh to everyone. Because leaving Mitzrayim, that's something the eirev rav, hopefully, that's what Moshe was thinking, that they hopefully should be able to participate in. That's why it's interesting. In the beginning of that statement of Moshe Rabbeinu giving the second mitzvah first, right, of remembering Yetzias Mitzrayim, it says Vayar Moshe el ha'am. It doesn't say Vayar Moshe el b'nei Yisrael. It says Vayar Moshe el ha'am, to the people. And what is the am? Is always a code word. Shem eirev rav. That includes the eirev rav. That's why it's always B'Lashon Rabbim. Ashi Yitzasem Hayom, that you, in the plural, are leaving today. If he's just talking to Yidden, then you talk to Yidden in Lashon Yachid. The answer is not just talking to Yidden, he's talking to the Yidden and the eirev rav. Hayom Atam Yotzim. Amnam, and that's what he says an amazing thing. When Moshe Rabbeinu describes the mitzvah of Yetzias Mitzrayim, he says, Hayom Atam Yotzim, you are leaving today, mi beis avadim, from the house of slavery. What house of slavery? From being slaves. The answer is, only the Yidden were slaves. And he doesn't want to only talk to Yidden. He wants to the eirev rav too. So to the eirev rav, he can't say we're leaving from being slaves. To the eirev rav, we can say we're leaving from Bebeis Avadim, from a country that's about enslaving people. But he doesn't want to say Avadim Amish because he wants to include the eirev rav. You see how much Moshe Rabbeinu was trying to be makar of them. Klammer, Yitzasim Mitzrayim HaNikr Beis Avadim. We're leaving Mitzrayim, which is called the country of Beis Avadim. Al Shem Yisrael Shenishtabdu Sham. Why is it called Beis Avadim? Because Yidden are enslaved there. Aval Atam Lo Nishtavdu, but the eirev rav were not enslaved. Lachin lo yomer hakasav mi yosem avad. And that's why it doesn't say that. Remember the day of the Exodus that you're being taken out of slavery. It doesn't say that. El mi beis avad. Gam Ramaz. Now this is an amazing thing. Gam Ramaz b'amrei. It's also being hinted to the next thing that Moshe Rabbeinu continues. Ki b'chayzek yad. Remember that Hashem is taking you, plural, out of the house of slavery, because with a strong hand, Hashem is doing this, right? With all the makkahs. It says like this: Kikol hatzarich chayzek yad. It's going to open up another question. Kikol hatzarich chayzek yad. The entire need of the makkahs, of the Rebbeinu Shalom, with all the strength and the special effects and the miracles, lo'haya ba'avur Yisrael, was unnecessary just to take Klal Yisrael out of slavery. Why? Ela ba'avuram. It was really about the eirev. That's the whole thing of the makkahs, was really there to motivate the eirev to get them out. Why? Because the pasuk says in Parshas Bay, why am I doing these makkahs? Is what? That the whole world should know my name. How is the whole world going to know my name? By the eirev coming out. That's the biggest kiddush Hashem in the world. And if it wasn't for all the makkahs, Par would never let the eirev leave. Would Par let Klal Yisrael leave? Of course, he didn't want Klal Yisrael to begin with. He was stuck with Klal Yisrael. And the only slavery was, why was slavery there to begin with? Because he's afraid that if the eirev associate themselves with Klal Yisrael, so it's going to be bad for him. So I'm going to subjugate Klal Yisrael and make the eirev not want to have any shaykhs to them. But if he had the option of just getting rid of Klal Yisrael, that solves my problem much easier. What do I need this? The big hassle of having slaves, I don't need this for. They weren't really being productive, right? We know they were building and the buildings broke down. They weren't really being productive. So just get them out. If Moshe Rabbeinu came to Paro and said, listen, I'll make you a deal. Give me Klal Yisrael, and you'll keep the eirev. You could be in control of the Chartumim. You keep them, and I'll take Klal Yisrael. He's like, I'll pay you to do that. It was the biggest thing in the world. So why is Rebbeinu Shalom not doing this? Why is Makkah after Makkah after Makkah? The answer is because what the Makkahs are really about is to get the eirev. This is the mixed signals that Moshe Rabbeinu is getting. On the one hand, you're telling me Moshe Rabbeinu says to Rebbeinu Shalom, the whole Makkah, it's all about the eirev. It's all about getting the eirev. And yet now that I'm telling you I want the eirev, which is not a good idea. I see what's going on over here. So the whole thing is a kash. This is what we're going to be ending with right now. It's like, well, first of all, we see again who the eirev were. We understand the mile, the kiddush Hashem that would be done with, that would be created with this. And in fact, the Rebbeinu Shalom is interested in that. L'man saper shmim b'kol haaretz. And that's the whole purpose of the makkahs, was to get the eirev. And the mitzvah of remembering Yitzis Mitzrayim is woven. Moshe Rabbeinu is giving that mitzvah in a way to include the eirev. Yet mitzad sheni, when it comes down to it, and Moshe wants the eirev, Moshe says not a good idea. And then Moshe pushes back and says, okay, you know what, fine, do whatever you want. Like the whole, it needs further explanation. It's just so this is what's sort of like the historical background of who they were, and the kashas that sort of arise with like bringing them in the fold, not bringing them in the fold. Bez Hashem next week, slowly. Bez Hashem next week we'll delve a little bit deeper into this and to expand the sugi even further. Okay.